It was supposed to be a quiet afternoon in Willowbrook Estates, the kind of suburban neighborhood where lawns were perfectly trimmed, the air smelled faintly of barbecue, and neighbors waved politely without getting too close. But that calm shattered in a single instant. A sharp hiss, a yelp of pain, and the bitter smell of chemicals filling the air. Jake Morrison dropped his coffee mug when he saw what had happened. His loyal service dog, Ranger, was cowering, whimpering, his fur damp from a spray of pesticide, and standing there with a smug grin, tennis racket in one hand and the can in the other, was Margaret Thornwell, HOA president and self-proclaimed Queen of the neighborhood. "Oh, relax," she sneered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Dogs like that aren't welcome here. He was barking. I took care of it." Jake's jaw tightened. He didn't yell, didn't curse. He just stepped forward, scooped up Ranger, and gave her a stare so cold it sent a shiver down her spine. "Ma'am," he said calmly, his voice deep and steady, "if you ever touch my dog again, you're gonna regret it." Margaret scoffed. "Bless your heart," she muttered, turning her back on him as if he were nothing. And in that moment, Jake knew this wasn't just an HOA squabble. This was war. Jake Morrison was no stranger to war. He had spent 12 years serving his country, overseas, Afghanistan, Iraq. He had seen sandstorms that blinded men, heard gunfire echoing through narrow alleys, and watched brothers in arms fight for every breath. Coming home to Texas was supposed to be his reward. He inherited his grandfather's land, a 47-acre piece of heaven, all rolling pastures and wildflowers, a quiet place built by sweat and sacrifice. Pops had carved this land from nothing, built a dam with his own hands, and kept every deed neatly filed in a metal lockbox. Jake had dreamed of returning here for years, sitting on the porch with Ranger, fishing in the creek his grandfather dug, and finally finding peace. But when he came home, he barely recognized it. The land that had been in his family for generations was now surrounded by manicured streets, freshly painted mailboxes, and houses that looked like they'd been cloned. Willowbrook Estates wasn't just a neighborhood, it was an empire run by Margaret Thornwell, a woman with pearls around her neck and power at her fingertips. She had friends on the city council, a husband in politics, and a vision of turning every inch of this town into something she controlled. The first letter came while Jake was overseas. "We'd love to discuss a generous offer for your property." Then another. "Your land has fallen into neglect. Please contact Willowbrook Estates HOA immediately." By the time he came home, he found bright surveyor stakes hammered into his yard and a shiny park sign installed over his grandfather's fishing hole. It read, "Willowbrook Estates Private Park." That wasn't just his land. That was his childhood. Jake stormed into the HOA clubhouse, the sign tucked under his arm, and confronted Margaret in front of the entire board. "You're trespassing," he growled, slamming the sign onto the table. "This is Morrison land, always has been." Margaret tilted her head, smiling sweetly. "Oh, soldier boy," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Your family abandoned this place. The HOA is just revitalizing it." Jake's eyes narrowed. "Abandoned? Lady, I was deployed, defending your right to sit in this clubhouse and sip wine at 3 in the afternoon." The board members gasped, and Margaret's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. But she recovered quickly. "Listen," she snapped, "we respect your service, but this is a community, not some backwoods farm. If you don't like the changes, maybe it's time you moved on." Jake left that meeting with white knuckles. He'd faced enemies armed with AK-47s, but somehow Margaret Thornwell's smugness burned him worse than any firefight. Things escalated quickly. One morning, he woke up to find a bright pink eviction notice stapled to his barn. A few days later, a construction crew rolled up, claiming they were authorized to install a walking trail through his pasture. Then came the fines. Unapproved barn color. Grass exceeds HOA height standards. Improper fencing. The thing was, Jake didn't even live in Willowbrook Estates. His property wasn't under their jurisdiction. But that didn't matter to Margaret. She made it clear that she wanted his land, and she was going to make his life hell until she got it. And then she sprayed Ranger. That was the last straw. Jake wasn't going to take another punch. It was time to punch back. He started quietly, the way soldiers do. Instead of yelling at HOA meetings or filing complaints, he went digging. He spent nights in courthouse basements, flipping through dusty records, searching old survey maps, and digging out every document his grandfather ever saved. He uncovered water rights dating back to 1923, proving every drop running through Willowbrook belonged to him. He found maps showing that Margaret's precious subdivision had paved roads outside their legal boundary. He even uncovered illegal permits signed by her husband, allowing Willowbrook to expand over property that wasn't theirs. While Jake worked behind the scenes, Margaret turned up the heat. She sent private security to patrol his driveway, claimed he was a danger to the neighborhood, and even spread rumors that he was a ticking time bomb veteran. But Jake stayed calm. He let her dig her own grave. He started making friends, too. The old-timers in town remembered his grandfather. They hated what Willowbrook had become. One man gave him a photo of Pops building the dam in the 60s. Another neighbor wrote a sworn statement saying Willowbrook bulldozed his land. Piece by piece, Jake built an airtight legal case. The night of the HOA board meeting was electric. The clubhouse was packed with angry residents, curious neighbors, and a few reporters who'd caught wind of a brewing scandal. Jake walked in wearing his dress uniform, boots polished, ribbons shining. He carried a thick folder of documents under his arm. Margaret sat at the head of the table, pearls gleaming, her husband at her side with a team of lawyers. "Mr. Morrison," she purred, "we're glad you decided to cooperate. Now if you'll—" "Just sign over!" Jake slammed the water rights deed onto the table. "This says every drop of water flowing through Willowbrook is mine," he said coolly. "And this," he flipped to another file, "shows your entire subdivision was built on land you didn't legally own." Margaret's smile froze. Her husband's face went pale. "You're bluffing," she hissed. "Try me," Jake said, leaning in. His voice was calm but sharp as a blade. "I'll have your subdivision shut down so fast, your lawns will be brown by next week." The room erupted. Board members whispered frantically. One lawyer quietly packed up his briefcase. Margaret's husband fumbled for words, but Jake wasn't. Done. He dropped copies of illegal permits, each one with her husband's signature. Within days, the HOA backed off. They tore down the park signs, canceled their development plans, and stopped sending fines. Margaret tried to save face, but her empire was crumbling. Her husband resigned from his council seat. Neighbors whispered about the man who had humiliated the HOA queen. Jake, meanwhile, wasn't done. He rebuilt his grandfather's dam and doubled its capacity. He filed fresh water rights permits, making them untouchable. He put up gates at every road crossing his property. And when Willowbrook residents complained about low water pressure, Jake sent a polite letter. "Conserve water, or move." Word spread fast. Margaret Thornwell disappeared from public view. She stopped attending HOA meetings. Her name became a cautionary tale. And Jake? He finally had peace. That summer, he sat on his porch with Ranger at his feet, watching. The sun dipped below the hills his grandfather once farmed. Sometimes he drove past Willowbrook and caught Margaret glaring from her porch, her face pale with humiliation. He'd tip his hat and smile, because Pops always said, "You don't start fights, but you sure as hell finish 'em."